something just happened that Vladimir Putin feared more than almost anything else in this war. And when I tell you that Ukraine has destroyed critical railway bridges connecting Russia to occupied Crimea, leaving as many as 110,000 Russian soldiers stranded and abandoned with no reliable food or weapon supplies, you're going to understand why this could be one of the most decisive blows against Russia's entire southern campaign. We're not talking about a minor bridge on a back road. We're not talking about temporary damage that can be quickly repaired. I'm talking about Ukraine systematically taking out key railway bridges and infrastructure links that formed the lifeline for Russian forces in Crimea and southern Ukraine. The result? Tens of thousands of Russian troops are now effectively cut off, facing severe shortages of ammunition, fuel, and basic provisions. Stay with me, because this is not just another strike. This is Ukraine executing the exact nightmare scenario Putin has tried desperately to prevent, and the consequences are unfolding in real time. Let's break down exactly how Ukraine did it. Through a combination of long-range precision strikes, unmanned systems, and special operations intelligence, Ukrainian forces targeted and destroyed vital railway bridges and supporting infrastructure on the routes feeding into Crimea. These bridges were the primary arteries for heavy rail transport, the fastest and most efficient way to move massive quantities of ammunition, fuel, armored vehicles, and food supplies from mainland Russia into the peninsula. Multiple strikes hit key points along these lines, causing structural collapses and rendering sections impassable. Secondary explosions and fires compounded the damage. Russian emergency crews are scrambling, but repairs under constant threat of further Ukrainian attacks are slow and extremely difficult. Satellite imagery and local monitoring confirm major disruptions, with trains halted and convoys forced onto vulnerable road networks that Ukraine continues to hammer with drones. The human and military impact is enormous. Estimates suggest up to 110,000 Russian soldiers in Crimea and the southern sectors now face severe supply shortages. Ammunition depots that were already under pressure have not been adequately replenished. Fuel stocks are dwindling. Food and medical supplies are becoming scarce. These troops aren't just inconvenienced. They are increasingly isolated and abandoned by a high command that prioritized other fronts. Units that were supposed to hold the land bridge and support operations in Zaporizhzhia and Kherson are now operating on critically thin margins. This was the one thing Putin feared losing most: reliable, high-capacity logistics into Crimea. The peninsula was meant to be an unsinkable aircraft carrier and a secure rear base. By destroying these railway bridges, Ukraine has turned it into a logistical trap. Russia can no longer move supplies at the scale required to sustain large forces under combat conditions. Road convoys are slower, more exposed, and already being picked apart by Ukrainian drones, exactly as we saw with earlier hits on the Chongar routes and other arteries. This strike builds directly on Ukraine's relentless counter-logistics campaign. Remember the major weapon depot destruction in Crimea that left thousands short on munitions? The repeated attacks on oil and fuel facilities causing shortages across the peninsula? The systematic pressure on the Kerch Bridge? The same sophisticated layered strategy, combining intelligence, drones, and precision effects, has now severed the rail lifeline. Ukraine's unmanned systems forces have proven again that they can reach deep, adapt in real time, and strike where it hurts Russia most. On the ground, the effects are already rippling outward. In the southern sectors, Russian units in the 36th Combined Arms Army and others are under even greater strain. Artillery rationing, already reported earlier, is becoming more severe. Assaults in Zaporizhzhia and Kherson are losing momentum as supplies fail to arrive. Meanwhile, in the Pokrovsk direction, Russian forces continue grinding costly attacks around Toretsk, Novopavlivka, Kurakova, and nearby villages, but Ukrainian defenders are holding with growing effectiveness, using drone strikes to exploit these very logistics weaknesses. Fighting remains intense in Chasiv Yar and the Lyman sector, yet Ukraine continues to repel major assaults. In the Sumy border zone, Russian probes are being turned back. Moscow's response, increased terror strikes on civilian infrastructure, only highlights its frustration and weakening position. Russia's broader crisis makes this even more devastating. With total casualties approaching 1 million, manpower is stretched to the limit. Now, with 110,000 troops in the south facing isolation and shortages, the strain multiplies. Artillery remains the heart of Russian doctrine, but without reliable rail resupply, that advantage evaporates. Troops become more vulnerable to Ukrainian drones, counter-battery fire, and infantry actions. Ukraine's military innovation continues to define this war. From improvised beginnings to a dedicated professional force with AI-enhanced systems, the ability to identify, target, and destroy critical infrastructure like these railway bridges shows extraordinary planning and execution. Russia's air defenses and engineering efforts have failed to protect the very links Putin needed most. Politically, the pressure on Moscow is intensifying. EU accession progress for Ukraine signals long-term Western commitment. European allies are stepping up support. Belarus under Lukashenko has already backed down from deeper involvement. Strikes like this further isolate Putin and demonstrate that Russia's control over occupied territories is far more fragile than it claims. Russia's territorial gains remain marginal and enormously expensive, with no realistic path to its original objectives. While Putin obsesses over the west, his southern flank is being systematically dismantled from the rear. Ukraine just destroyed the railway bridges Putin feared losing most. 110,000 Russian soldiers are now stranded with dwindling food and weapon supplies. The land bridge is choking. Crimea is turning from asset to liability, and the southern front is under unprecedented strain. This war remains brutal and the suffering real, especially for Ukrainian civilians, but the trajectory is unmistakable. Russia is being denied the logistics it needs to sustain its occupation, while Ukraine strikes deeper, holds firm, and builds for the future. The bridges are down, the supplies aren't coming, and Putin's nightmare in the south is becoming reality. We will keep watching every development, breaking it down, and asking the only question that matters: what happens next?